I can still remember the first moment I became homeless. I remember it being a warm spring evening, and I thought to myself, I have completely run out of options. I remember feeling extremely angry at myself for ending up on the streets, for all the failed recovery attempts, and for disappointing everyone I cared about. That anger soon turned to hopelessness. As the sun began to set, I realized I had to start figuring out where I was going to sleep that night. I found a piece of cardboard in an alleyway, and I lay it on the ground. I was 18 years old at the time, and as I lay on that brown piece of cardboard, with tears rolling down my face, I thought about how I ended up here. Growing up, I had it all. I had a loving family and all the privileges and opportunities anyone could ever ask for. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood, and I attended private schools. I was a happy kid. I loved to ride my bike and make mud pies in my backyard. My home life was stable and secure, but school was torture. In grade 1, I was constantly bullied. I have vivid memories of my classmates stealing my boots, stuffing them with snow, and hiding them in the playground. I ran around the playground in my green school socks, searching for them while the teacher was ringing their bell, telling me to hurry up and get in line. My peers laughed and pointed at me. This was the first time in my young life that I felt alone, like I felt there was something wrong with me. Over the next 10 years, I switched schools 7 times. When high school began, I tried to reinvent myself. I started to make friends, and I even had a boyfriend. I thought maybe the days of bullying were over. Maybe that was it. But when my boyfriend raped me, everything changed. He told everyone in the school that I had had sex with him, and all the friends that I had made disappeared very quickly. Everyone hissed slut when I walked down the hallway. I felt so much shame about what had happened to me that I thought if I pretended it didn't happen, it would all go away. Over the next year, I started to experiment with drugs and alcohol. The first time I tried ecstasy, I was at a party, and someone passed a pill around. 30 minutes after taking that pill, my face heated up. My spine tingled. I remember rubbing my hands up and down the textured couch that my parents had in their living room. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I felt confident. I felt strong. Soon, I began to steal money from my parents in order to afford my addiction. I knew what I was doing was dangerous, but I didn't care. I was popular. I finally had friends. I might not have been worried, but my parents sure were. At the age of 15, my parents sent me to a rehab center in the United States. Other than summer camp, this was my first time away from home. I cried so much at this center that my eyes crusted over, and the next morning I was unable to open them. It was at this center that I was first diagnosed with mental health. I was also diagnosed with a learning disability, a disability that affects my memory, which is why I always use cue cards when I'm on a stage. When I came home, I stayed sober for about a year, but all it took was one stressful event for me to relapse again. Within days, I was now not only using ecstasy, but also cocaine. I stopped coming home at night. I began to get constant nosebleeds. I started dating the man that was selling me drugs, who eventually put me to work selling for him. When I didn't sell enough, he'd play Russian roulette with a handgun, screaming at me to sit still. Even though I was petrified, I believed I was getting what I deserved. If he killed me, that would be my punishment for all the bad choices I had made in my life. I wasn't the only one going through this. My parents were really worried and desperate to find me help. With the advice of yet another professional, my parents sent me to a second rehab center in the US. This was the beginning of my cross-country tour of over 12 American treatment centers. After being away for 2 years, I returned home. I had moments of sobriety, but within a few months, there I was on that piece of cardboard, alone and scared. Despite all the years of treatment, the dozens of doctors who tried to get me to take responsibility for my actions, I just couldn't live up to this zero tolerance rhetoric of recovery. I was sleeping on this very piece of cardboard because my rehab centers had failed, because no one knew what else to do with me. People believed in me, but I didn't believe in myself. Every time I dozed off on that piece of cardboard, I woke up startled, disoriented, and afraid. That same evening at 2 a.m., a police officer poked me awake and told me that I couldn't sleep where I was sleeping or I would be given a ticket. I left my cardboard bed that night, wandering the streets of Toronto by myself. I didn't know how to survive without any money. Within the first 24 hours of being homeless, I was robbed and I was beaten. I had to learn quickly how to fend for myself. I taught myself how to panhandle, and I learned quickly that if I wanted to make any money, I had to sit on the ground, beneath the passerby. There was a clear power dynamic visible. The privilege that I had grown so accustomed to growing up didn't matter on the streets. Nothing mattered other than surviving. Soon, I became addicted to crack cocaine. Crack was the most intense high I had ever felt in my life. It made me feel invincible. I was living for my next high. It was the only thing that got me through, moment to moment. It was the boys, as I came to call them, who introduced me to a place called Eva's Phoenix, a homeless youth shelter. The boys were a group of drug dealers who I met while I was on the streets and who treated me like their sister. They believed in me and they supported me. I applied to the youth shelter, and several weeks later, I was accepted. Unlike places I had attended in the United States, Eva's Phoenix wasn't a rehab center. It wasn't a therapy center. No one forced me to talk about what was wrong with me or what I was facing. Instead, they gave me the skills and the confidence that I needed to make those choices on my own. The next few months were the most rigorous and remarkable of my life. Deciding to quit drugs, well, that was the easy part. Sticking to it, that took a supernatural willpower. Slowly, I began to open up to the staff and to my roommates. I began to gain a circle of friends, youth who were just like me, lost and looking for their way. I started to feel as if I had a place in the world again. While at Eva's Phoenix, I applied for their life skills and employment program. There, I learned how to write a resume and a budget, and I got a job in a childcare center. I loved learning the mechanics of education. Child development fascinated me, and being with children made me happy. It was at this moment that I realized early childhood education was a possibility for me. Once I found my passion, finding my worth just became easier. I started to gain confidence in myself. I moved out of Eva's 11 months later with a man I was dating, and I enrolled in high school to finish my remaining high school credits. Soon, the man I loved began to beat me. Everything I had worked so hard to achieve, my confidence, my identity, my understanding of good and bad, everything I had built was broken. The relationship consumed me the way that drugs used to. I invested everything I had into fixing it, fixing me, fixing him. After 2 black eyes, hundreds of bruises, and a broken rib, I left my abuser at the age of 22. At this point in my life, I started to realize that everything I was going through was for a reason. I graduated high school and went on to study early childhood education at George Brown College and Ryerson University. I became extremely passionate about advocacy, social justice, and equity, so much so that when I realized Eva's Phoenix was in jeopardy of closing its doors for condo development, I mounted a campaign to save it. The campaign took me to City Hall, and it resulted in a new property and $5 million for the relocation. I learned that my voice mattered. My story mattered. I was impacting others. I finally had a second chance to shine. I was able to graduate from both of my post-secondary programs with honors, and I was able to win 2 awards for my leadership. I also finally was able to repair my relationship with my parents, returning to a place of trust and respect. Today, I work as an early childhood educator in a kindergarten classroom. I love my job. I love making sure the children in my class have a positive experience where they feel valued and respected. My hope in working with young children is to help them see their worth so that they will never feel alone, afraid, or unwanted, as I did when I was in school. I can't tell you how many people think that bullying doesn't exist in kindergarten, but I can tell you it does. Young children are old enough to experience bullying, and they're old enough to learn how to prevent it. This is one of the reasons that I bring social justice into the classrooms that I teach in. As an educator, I'm constantly trying to explore issues of fairness and justice within my class. The outcomes of social justice, that brings me hope. Hope that by teaching kids to be advocates, we can eliminate issues like bullying and work towards a just world. Children are our future, and by teaching them about empathy, compassion, and social justice, I can help them become truth tellers and change makers. In addition to teaching, I also speak at events, fundraisers, and schools where I share my story. This past year, I became a published author in Toronto Life magazine where my story was published. Thanks. I am now engaged to somebody who reminds me every single day that I am worth something. I will always remember that cardboard bed. The memory reminds me of all I've overcome. It keeps me grounded and helps me calculate each step forward that I take. The memories reminds me to be aware of the privilege that I have, and that even with privilege, one can still be oppressed and marginalized. My experiences with addiction, mental health, and homelessness are now experiences I can talk openly about, because by talking about them, I can now play a role in reducing the stigmas associated with it. It doesn't matter how much I build myself up or how much confidence and love I have for myself. Stigma swoops in with a vengeance and makes me question every aspect of my being. As someone who also requires the use of a mental health service animal, I don't just experience stigma once in a while. I experience it multiple times a day. I experience it in restaurants, grocery stores, on airplanes, and on buses. I even had an access challenge when I was in Winnipeg this year at the Canadian Human Rights Museum. Ironic, I know. Kaylee is my lifeline. She alerts to oncoming medical concerns, such as changes in my blood sugar, and is trained to assist in reducing symptoms connected to my mental health. The world we live in marginalizes and stigmatizes people because of their experiences. No one is marginalized because they want to be, and no one is immune from it. We treat those who are experiencing homelessness and mental health like they're disposable, because it's easier to ignore what is going on than to admit it affects us. If I had confidence in myself and I had the ability to use my voice many years ago, I would have told my bullies in grade school that their words were shattering my soul. I would have told my rapist that he created emptiness that was impossible to fill. I would have told my parents how scared I was that drugs were the only thing keeping me alive. I would have told the police officer that he needed to do more to help, And I would have told my abusive boyfriend that he didn't beat me down, he beat me up. He showed me once again what I was trying to escape. Most importantly, I would have told my younger self that I mattered just the way I was, and that all I needed to do was believe in myself. It took me many years to find my voice, but we all have one. Sometimes we struggle to find it. Sometimes we struggle to nurture it, but it's there. And once we have that voice, once we use that voice, we are capable of anything. Thank you so much.